When we talk about sleep, we often think of babies, and a lot of the times parents don't realize that there are plenty of resources out there for our older kiddos, ages 3 to 5. Our kids' sleep is always changing and evolving, and it's my goal to help families of children of all ages get their sleep on track. Hi, if you are new here, my name is Sarah Bossio. I am the owner and lead pediatric sleep expert of Your Zen Baby Sleep. I work with exhausted parents of children ages 0 to 8 years old, and I help them to establish flexible schedules, peaceful bedtimes, and to teach their children to sleep through the night so that their entire family can get the sleep that they need and deserve, including my 3 to 5 year olds. So let's talk about sleep needs in that age range and how to get more of it. In these preschool years, there are many big transitions in sleep. Most notably is the nap drop. Your child will likely drop their nap completely, which I know sounds really scary because we all love that midday break from our child, right? If I'm being totally honest. And it's also a big transition because oftentimes if your child is in preschool or daycare, the daycare is going to still offer the nap, and that can cause really late bedtimes with your child. Another transition that our children go through in this age is they have a strong will and they don't want to go to sleep. They realize that they can fight sleep, and if they have a reduced need for sleep and we are not addressing that reduced need for sleep, this can turn into bedtime battles. So there's a lot of things going on with their growth, their development, and their sleep need during the ages of 3 to 5. The average amount of hours that a 3-year-old needs is anywhere between 11 and 13 hours total in a 24-hour period. So this might look like 11 hours total overnight, or it could look like 1 hour during the day and 11 hours overnight, right? If your 3-year-old is still hanging on to their nap. A 5-year-old needs about 10 to 12 hours total in a 24-hour period. And by the time your child is 5, I really don't want them taking any naps anymore. If they're taking naps, they're likely making up for poor overnight sleep. And I would rather them take advantage of deep quality sleep that we're getting overnight instead of making up for naps in the daytime. I want to talk about 3 common issues at this age range, and first and foremost, we'll elaborate on that dropping the nap as the most common issue. Like I talked about, the hardest part about dropping the nap, well, I don't know, maybe there's a lot of hard parts about dropping the nap. It's, your child goes through this phase of like, I don't need it at 12 or 1, but then I really do need it at like 3:30 or 4. But if I take it at 3:30 or 4, I'm not going to go to bed until 11. And if I don't take it at 3:30 or 4, I'm a hot mess at 5:30 or 6. So it's a really hard 2 to 4 weeks when we're really pushing our child through that no nap phase in order to get their body to adjust to not taking a nap. The second hard part of this is if your child is in daycare or preschool, in many states, they're required to offer a nap time until the age of 5. So if we're trying to drop the nap at home and they're being offered the nap at their childcare facility, we might be working against each other's goals, especially if the child doesn't need the nap anymore. We know the child doesn't need the nap if bedtime is pushing much later than 8 p.m. The best bedtime for children through the age of 7 years old is no later than 8 p.m. It really is the optimal time because after 8 p.m., melatonin drops and cortisol rises again. We really want to optimize sleep when melatonin is at the highest and cortisol is at their lowest, which is normally no later than 8 p.m. So what do we do, right? In this scenario, I'm going to talk about this in the solution section, but I'd like to talk about 2 other problems that we have in the 3 to 5-year-old range regarding sleep. Another common problem parents come across often at this age is bedtime refusal, right? So I don't want to go to bed, one more book, one more sip of water, I'm hungry, lay with me, sit with me, oh my God, I can think of a million different excuses because I've heard them all as a parent, and I've heard a million of them from all of my families who I have supported one-on-one. This could be because of, again, a nap that we're taking that is not necessary. And it could just be because of natural development. Your child doesn't want to go to bed and they're pushing the boundary, which is what our children should be doing. It's developmentally appropriate to push boundaries that we establish. But there are ways that we can keep our boundary and make sure that they do go to bed when we add some structure to the bedtime routine, which again, we'll talk about in the solutions section, but I want to mention one more problem that you might be experiencing before we get there. You finally got your child to bed, but they're up at 2 a.m. because they had a nightmare. Or they won't go to bed because they're afraid of the dark. This is very, very real. Our children can start experiencing nightmares actually as early as 2.5, but the peak of them is somewhere between 3 and 3.5. And this is because we're definitely having a more active imagination. We are talking to our friends more. There is more play and interacting happening at school. We are watching more television possibly or having more screen time. And our imagination is running wild. So there can be more real fears about bedtime, and there actually are nightmares. Your child probably isn't lying about having them. However, what we do when they wake up and what we do when they come into our room is what helps them to reduce the nightmares or what reinforces them to continue to talk about the nightmares. And we'll talk about helping them in the next section. So I want to chat all about solutions to help your 3 to 5-year-olds get better sleep. I want the naps to be gone, like naps be gone. I promise you, it's so much better when your kids drop a nap because then you have the entire day to yourselves to be able to do whatever you want to do. And then bedtime is early again. You might be able to pull bedtime back to 6:30 or 7, which is fantastic. So that's number one. We need to pull bedtime back to 6:30 or 7 because they're not going to be sleeping during the day. But what do we do in the gap? Daycare or preschool to offer them a rest time. So in somewhere quietly where they can quietly read a book, but to not allow them to sleep. If they're not able to do that, what I want you to do is ask them to wake your child up after 30 minutes. So they're only really sleeping for a very, very short cat nap so that it doesn't affect the bedtime. Then at home, what I would like you to do is either push them to stay awake completely, or you can offer them a rest time if you need a little bit of a break in their room. Where they can play with something simple, a toy that can entertain them, or even, to be honest with you, like mom to mom, give them a screen and let them play for 30 minutes, right? Everybody needs a break, and don't feel guilty about that because we all need just to relax our body for a little bit in the middle of the day to be able to extend to get to the bedtime. What I want you to do is set expectations for the amount of time that it will take to drop the nap. This is the longest period of time in terms of nap transitions that it takes, anywhere from 2 to 4 weeks before the body really establishes getting used to not napping during the daytime. Make sure you make early bedtime a priority so that we don't deal with middle of the night wakings as your child completely drops their nap. If the nap dropping has not made bedtime easier for you and you're still dealing with bedtime refusal, or if the bedtime refusal is cropping up again now that your children are a little bit older, what we need to do is just establish structure and boundaries. So I love visual charts for bedtime. So establishing your steps of the bedtime routine, taking off the cards, having little cards that you take off and remove when those steps are done, and moving on to the next part of the routine. I want you to tell your child that we are moving on to the next part, and you mean that you're moving on to the next part and not giving in when they ask you to do another book and you say no, right? So if your child says, I want one more book, and you say, at the beginning, we are reading 2, and you've already read 2, you have to stick to your guns and say, I told you we were reading 2, we are only reading 2, we are now moving on to the next step, right? You are going to see more pushback from your child the more often you give in to their requests. Will you see tantruming? Yes. Will you see protest? Absolutely. Is this going to make you uncomfortable? But it's going to eventually reduce their bedtime refusal because they're going to know that the boundary is there. What's happening is you have set a boundary that they keep pushing successfully. What you need to do is set a boundary, and they have to know that you're not able to push it, that you're not budging. You need to set a boundary and mean the boundary that you set in a loving, kind way, right? It doesn't have to be mean. You as the parent know that bedtime is a priority, and it's okay as the parent to say no and to say, this is the rule, and this is the time that we're going to bed, and this is how we're going to bed, and this is the structure that I am going to establish. In order to address your child's fears, I love using a red nightlight in the room. It is no longer necessary to keep your room pitch black anymore. Using red can be calming. It also can help to still create the melatonin in our brains that is really good for sleep. White light and blue light is going to increase cortisol, which is why I prefer red. It'll help to illuminate the room just enough so that your children can see that there is nothing scary in the room. And what I want you to do is dream plan. So be proactive about the nightmares ahead of time. Sit down with your child at bedtime beforehand and dream, right? So talk about where you're gonna go in your dreams. Be creative. A dream that my youngest daughter and I love to plan is going through a Candyland forest. And we describe every detail of our Candyland forest. So as soon as we walk into the forest, we are walking on a peppermint patty path. And the trees are made of Hershey Kisses and Kit Kat bars. And we pick off the flowers from the trees are jelly beans. And as we go down the path, we see ice cream bushes, right? And we describe every single detail and we talk about what we're going to do in the Candyland forest and where we're going to meet. And this is something that's very calming to her because then she knows she's going to have good thoughts going into the night instead of being afraid of the nightmares. If your children wake up in the middle of the night with a nightmare, or if they talk to you about it the next morning, talk about the nightmare. Have them actually say it out loud. When we give the nightmare a name and when we discuss it, it reduces the anxiety that it brings. It reduces it staying in the head. And I want you to validate, wow, that sounds scary. It does sound scary. It was just a nightmare, right? It was just a bad dream. And I want you to know that I'm here and I'm keeping you safe. So here's a comfort object. Here's something to make you comfortable, right? And we're going to go back to sleep now. And you're going to walk your child back to bed and you're going to tuck them in. And we're going to dream plan again the next night. This is a really great way to establish confidence in your children's sleep so that they can start to do this on their own as they get a little bit older. All of these problems are just normal transitions that your children are going to go through between the ages of 3 and 5. And what's really exciting is that you are well on your way to big kid sleep. And big kid sleep is fun. There aren't as many problems in big kid sleep, and it becomes much easier to manage big kid sleep. So like you're at the light at the end of the tunnel, parents. I'm really excited for you. If this was helpful for you, please let me know by giving the video a like, and if you have questions, leave a comment. I love interacting with you and understanding your trials and your tribulations as a fellow parent. Be sure to subscribe to my channel so that you're the first to know when my latest content is published. And as always, from my living room to yours, thank you so much for joining me, and I can't wait to see you next time.